Welcome to my Wisdom Wednesday talk about peace and discomfort. When I decided to focus this month on this theme, it occurred to me that every spiritual quest that we go on, every spiritual endeavor or endeavor of healing or awakening or enlightenment, every one of these quests in some way or another starts with this same intention, the same goal. I want to end my suffering. Every spiritual question that we ask can kind of be boiled down to this: how can I end suffering? And obviously, it's not the only way to frame the spiritual questions. It's not the only way to inspire us on our spiritual quests. But I investigate a little bit, and I'm sure that you could find an angle at which this has been true for you all along. And in some framings of our intention, we might put it more positively rather than I want to end suffering. I want to initiate something positive, right? Or I want to initiate healing. I want to discover what I really am and live that. And obviously, if this framing of things doesn't really work for you, or doesn't connect, or inspires some challenging emotions, examine that and feel free to abandon the theme at the end of the month. And maybe that's why there's only been a couple people in sessions. Also, it's August and things are quiet for people, but or people are on vacation or whatever. But the point is, it might not be your favorite framing of it, but it turns out that a lot of spiritual teachers have framed it just this way. And so many spiritual seekers come to those teachers, to those enlightened beings, with this same question: what the heck do I do about this suffering? And so maybe the theme resonates, maybe it doesn't, but in any case, it is in some way or another relevant to all of us, and it's a great place to begin. So, good news. Like I said, there are so many teachings, maybe even all the teachings in some way are addressing this. So we've got a lot of very great material to work with. Tough news. All of these teachings that I'm going to turn to, at least from my teachers, from the non-dualist teachers that I respect the most, they all say that if we really want to do something about the suffering, if we really want what we do on our meditation cushion or out in the world to make a difference, to put a dent in suffering in some way or another, for ourselves, for others, for whoever it is that we care about, the meditation that we just did helped us access that deep care. Whatever it is that we care about, we don't want it to suffer. That's just built in. Or at least not to needlessly suffer, or to suffer without there being some kind of benefit to it. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits to suffering today. Whatever it is that we love enough that we don't want it to suffer, before we can help it, we have to do something that most of us find really challenging. There's a lot here that can be really challenging, honestly. We have to admit that we are creating at least some of the suffering. We have to take responsibility for our role that we play in suffering being made. And that's tough. Yeah, and some of what we'll talk about today, I think will illuminate a little bit of why that's so tough for us. And I know that for me, I've gotten stalled out there. I've gotten freaked out at the threshold of this, realizing, oh my gosh, I have to take responsibility and I have to shift it. More good news. Through these teachings, we get some very actionable techniques to do this work, to do it one step at a time, and to begin to clear away those blockages and obstacles which make our suffering seem so huge and so insurmountable. We discover what we really are through this process. And what we are is so much bigger and vaster than suffering and pain, also much bigger and vaster than pleasure and, feeling good. So, though it's not an easy journey, it is exactly the journey that we all are asking for, or at least we want the end result, right? And so I feel very fortunate that I have some good wisdom to lean into as I start the journey. I'll read to you a little bit from my teacher, Nisargadatta. You create disharmony and then complain. When you desire and fear, and identify yourself with your feelings, you create sorrow and bondage. Now, here's the alternative, and this is what we're sort of moving toward. It's kind of like the full circle where we're going to end up at the end. When you create with love and wisdom and remain unattached to your creations, the result is harmony and peace. It is only self-identification with your mind that makes you happy or unhappy. Rebel against your enslavement by your mind. See your bonds as self-created and break the chains of attachment and revulsion. So we'll return to some of those themes. And I'll break down that quote in just a moment. What I want to say first, I think, is that I want to go ahead and just say this theme is coming up really strongly for me because I have had pain in my life. Again, we all have. And I can look back and see my spiritual quest, so much of my life's endeavors about dealing with that suffering, ending that suffering, preventing suffering, trying to set up a life for myself where there's less suffering. And along the way, it has not been a straight line from more suffering to less. And if I had been really honest along the way, I maybe could have seen this for myself. I couldn't. I couldn't really see this for myself. But what I was really, really asking for was exactly that. Like what I was really trying to do with the way that I approached my life was get rid of pain and increase pleasure. And where I created suffering for myself. You know, the way he said, it is only self-identification with your mind that makes you happy or unhappy, right? He's asking you to break the chains of attachment and revulsion. I was attached to the pleasure and I was revulsed by the pain. I didn't want pain. I identified as the one who felt, and he said, don't identify with your feelings. I identified with the person who felt good in those moments of my life where I felt good. And I was disidentified. I was disassociated. I was trying to reject all the experiences that I'd had with suffering. I thought, no, that's not me. Or with pain. I gotta just I gotta get out of that. And along the way, there have been times where the suffering got really, really bad. And I've been dealing with chronic pain in my body for really the last handful of years, but it's increased over the last chunk of time, and started to have these monthly episodes that are quite debilitating. And it has given me this deep exploration of what pain is, why it's in our lives, how it works, how I can relate to it. If I had had my way, I just would have figured out a way to erase pain. And I know that along the way I felt some confusion. So there's the physical pain, or there's the pain of, just having emotions, having a body. And then there's suffering. And that suffering that I create, and this is really what that quote is about, and he talks about it more deeply in some other quotes I'll share too. But that the suffering is really more of a psychological state that we create when we're resisting the pain. We're resisting the truth that right now, my whatever, however I want to identify or not, right now doesn't feel good. And that's been really tough for me. It's been tough at times. You're already feeling pain of some kind, and then on top of it, you're adding to it this story that there's something wrong with you for even experiencing it. You must not be meditating well enough, or you must not be doing your practice right, because you're not escaping this mortal thing. Okay, so I'll share this with you from Nisargadatta. He says, pain is physical, suffering is mental. Beyond the mind, there is no suffering. Pain, that physical pain that we're talking about, is merely a signal that the body is in danger and requires attention. Similarly, suffering warns us that the structure of memories and habits, which we call the person, vyakti in Sanskrit, is threatened by loss or change. Now, pain is essential for the survival of the body, but none compels you to suffer. Suffering is due entirely to clinging or resisting. Clinging is raga, resisting is devesha. It is a sign of our own unwillingness to move on, to flow with life. So, clinging and resisting, raga and devesha. This brings us right up to what basically the Buddhists and the yogis and in these traditions, what creates suffering is there's really a short list of things that create suffering, and we learn that they actually really all work together. to create our experience of suffering, and they're called the kleshas. Raga and devesha are two of them. They're a kind of pair that go together, we learn. And we learn right in the Yoga Sutras that the definition of raga is clinging to pleasure, and devesha is resisting pain. And we further learn that this pair, that they always go together like the front and the back of your hand, like night and day. That again, like he says, pain is part of life, pleasure is part of life too. That's a signal that the body is getting what it needs, right? And what we might call kind of an ego satisfaction is when we think that the self, that my vyakti, that my personality and my projection, and I'm winning. I'm doing a good job with that. I wanted to project that I was this yogi who was above pain and suffering because I had figured out how to meditate and stretch my way out of pain. And when that wasn't true, the suffering came from me going, wait, who am I then? Does this stuff even work? Right? The doubt that I was thrown into, the shame. I must not be doing a good enough job. The guilt. If I had only figured this out earlier, I wouldn't have planted seeds for suffering in my past, and now I'm living them, and I hate myself for creating that, right? So you see the difference. That the ego, the ego is one of our other kleshas, and the ego, once it starts to identify, right? He said it's all due to this self-identification. Once we start to identify, I'm this one. I'm the yogi, in my case or whatever, like I'm the yogi, the meditator, the healthy person. I'm the person who blogs about how great my marriage is and then it explodes. I'm the one who, it's like that. You can start to see how that clinging to our identities, and the pushing away of what we disidentify with starts to create this suffering. The body is going to have pleasure, it's going to have pain. Non-dualism means that we start to see that these things are not actually opposed, that they're one. They're not two. They are two, but they go together. They create one whole. And then sort of deeper than that, underneath the identity, so we've got this, it's like a built-in reaction, my push and my pull. It's not something that I'm like consciously going, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and resist. I'm gonna press resistance on this. Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and cling to that. No, right? They're happening. It feels like kind of on a gut level. And that's because we've already sort of selected these identities and reinforced for ourselves the ego, the asmita. Now, underneath even that is our stories. Raga, our stories, our avidya, our beliefs. And the more that I'm exploring avidya, the more I realize that there's like a morals really are kind of woven into our stories inextricably. That as long as there's avidya there, it's not just a story like, let me, sit down, let me tell you a tale. It's not, here's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Isn't that interesting? Our avidyas come with a sense of right and wrong. They come with a sense of good and bad. They come with a sense of me and me. I'm the good on the side of the right, and the bad. And of course, we can flip that around. We can make ourselves our own worst enemy, which we do at times, right? And with lots of shame and guilt, and say, "Oh, I did the bad thing." Right? So then what do I have to do to get clean again, to get right again? This is all really relevant, believe it or not. I want to share with you, of course, the last klesha is fear. Now, fear is a special one in that, well, fear is kind of like sukha and dukkha, meaning pain and pleasure. These just are. These are going to be in our experience sometimes. Fear, like pain and pleasure, gives us information about being immortal, that are really important. Doesn't mean we have to feed into it, but yeah. So those are the 5 kleshas, right? Resistance, clinging, an identity, a sense of self, our stories and beliefs, and then almost like an atmosphere around all of this. Whenever the kleshas are present, fear is present. Okay, so I used to spend a lot of time responding to my pain in such a way that activated my kleshas more. And it's taken me a very long time to see this. But as I do, I realize that my resistance, like my response to the pain would be to increase the resistance, to clinch up against it, right? Try to and just, I gave you guys all those inquiry questions last week. Hopefully been exploring. But, I want you all to explore for yourself. Like, can you kind of bring yourself into a kind of somatic memory of being in pain? What was your response? How did you respond? And I used to try to spend a lot of time trying to control, trying to push away what was painful, trying to grasp after whatever it was that felt like it was my lifeline or my pleasure bringer. And I would try to work really hard to kind of manufacture something better. And that's all fine, but what of course our teachers tell us is that you can do the outer work out here in the world of trying to kind of change stuff out here as much as you want. You can try to pull in more good and push out more with what you've decided is bad, right? All those morals come from our avidya, all those stories of what's good and bad, right? But you're never gonna resolve the real issue until you deal with the inner. How you're responding to things. Okay, and so how do we do that inner work? That's really the rest of this talk. Okay. So, what's the new response? How do we start to cultivate a new response? It starts with awareness. It always starts with our awareness. And use whatever techniques work for you. I've been teaching some this month in our meditations, some techniques that work really well for me. Dropping my awareness away from thoughts and into the body. I'm going to pause here and just bring up, what Judy had written in at the beginning before I started the talk, when I asked, what have you guys been observing about the theme in your own life? Judy said, looking at my interactions with a family member, I yet again realized that I allow myself to get caught up in her stories. And I question my role in all of it. it isn't my job to call her out, but it gets exhausting, and I look at my emotions and I feel resentment at times, a tug and pull of emotions. So I'm going to pause on that right there, because right there, she's giving this great life example of an experience of discomfort and and suffering, uh, and as we watch, right, the inner responses, noticing that inner world and how that all works. And right there, this other person has stories, and it is in the nature of when we are in our kleshas, right, assuming that this family member is in their suffering. So that tells us right away that the kleshas are present and strong for that person. So lo and behold, they are projecting their story out. They're trying to, instead of going and fixing what's, doing that inner work, what we all do this, right? We all tend to do this, but watch it in your life, watch it in others. Try to watch without blame or shame. Really important. We'll talk about that too. But try to watch without blame or shame. You're just gonna you're gonna observe more. You're gonna learn way more if you're not putting in that moral overlay. Recognize that our blame and shame comes from our avidya, our own avidya. Don't have avidya about her avidya. No, but but what we can definitely say is, without any blame or shame, without any moral I'm better, you're worse, I can say that looks painful. It makes me feel painful when I feel like I'm supposed to be playing that game kind of with you, playing along with your stories. And I didn't pause there to give a big specific piece of advice necessarily, but really mostly to point out that this is what we're all working with to a certain extent. And right there in her language, you start to see evidence of the kleshas. Okay, so before we can even have the space to be the witness and observe, we have to be able to do that first thing of getting unattached to where we tend to get attached. And again, when fear is present, it can actually make us double down. Right? Pain is present. Oh my gosh. My pleasure went away. Oh my gosh. That is going to make me often, right, go even deeper into what it turns out are the very causes of suffering. And so we have to be able to cultivate these techniques. This is why we meditate every day if we can. This is why we really work at it, because this isn't easy. We have to be able to take that awareness away from the kleshas, which, as Nisargadatta pointed out, as Patanjali of the Yoga Sutras points out, it's in our mind. And a great technique for bringing the awareness out of the mind is really learning how to put it in the body, and then specifically learning how to put awareness in the body, and then see if there's relaxation that's available. Because again, it's that tension that is going to cut off the flow of energy, the feeling of health, the feeling that we have options. And as soon as we're back in a state of trust, again, that fear dissipates enough for us to actually start to get the space, to actually have a little room for balance again, to actually get a little relief from is in a way we need to get enough relief from the suffering that we can see our way through and out of it. So that has to do with awareness. It also has to do with a kind of posture of relaxation, of respect, of listening. I talked in our meditation today more than I usually do about posture. And I've been thinking about it a lot, because actually, as I am trying to figure out my pain and my chronic, whatever this chronic illness that I have is, it's become very clear to me that as I get older, and I think I also spent more time in these last handful of years sitting at a desk. There's a lot of factors, And I'm a very flexible person. I have very open hips, but that actually may be making my issue worse. But I think some of what's going on is a pelvic issue, that where I allow my pelvis to be in a funky position for a long period of time, that creates some physical pain. And I think for people who are less flexible than me, that maybe they would just get low back pain before what has started to happen to me, which is actually like a pelvic floor disorder. Anyway, but I leave my body in certain positions for long periods of time, and it's having ramifications that I'm not really fully aware of. And I just kind of, and where am I at those times? I'm in my mind. I'm usually working. I'm usually doing something that makes me forget I have a body. Um, and so I've been having to be much more conscious of my posture lately, and it's making a huge difference. And I'm noticing again, it's like these ways that we come back to the very beginning of our journey, right? But just noticing again these ways that asana means posture in Sanskrit. And it's also what we call like the physical yoga practice. You know, you go to a yoga studio, you do yoga asana as opposed to meditation, right? Or study, which is also all yoga. The point is, I'm realizing that asana is not just me getting out my yoga mat and doing some stretches. Asana means, how is my posture right now? How am I sitting? And in particular, where that big sacroiliac joint, that biggest kind of chunk of your body right at the center, is so important, and that has all this mobility, but actually mostly needs to just be stable. How is that tilted? How is that sitting? And how does the energy just flow? Big theme here. When we are in alignment with our true nature, when we're identifying as what we really are and not just as the ego, when we are living in a way that touches us in deeper, beyond stories and attachments and aversions, when we're in our true nature and in alignment, all is well. The good alignment and life itself make it happen. And so, okay, so we're on techniques. So awareness of the body, allowing yourself to actually take some awareness or some attention away from the mind, where the kleshas are happening. As we do this, we learn to let go. We learn to stop trying so hard. We learn that it's possible, and we can start to watch ourselves instead of clinging to soften, instead of resisting to soften. We need to study, or just find a mentor and follow them around and see how they respond to pain. We need to find resources for that, because gosh, our society and a lot of what we learned, certainly what I learned from my parents and those around me about how to deal with these situations, was just not very helpful. Not good or bad, but not helpful. Not helpful if the question we started with is, how can I relieve suffering? Notice what works and what doesn't work, and be willing to continue to let go of what doesn't work and seek out new role models. Yeah, you have a better idea. Okay. So here's kind of the heart of this. Notice when the kleshas are present and don't feed them. If when you're in a pain place, you can do that, I just had a surge of pride because I'm learning how to do this. I have been getting these opportunities which pull me out of the world and say, this is your meditation. You're going to meditate on this discomfort for several hours. And I have a list of things that we gain through suffering, which I'm going to share at the very end, which is coming very soon. But I'm realizing that this, I have a great sense of sort of pride in a way. I have learned, I have access to part of myself that I'm really proud of, who this person can experience something that is personally really uncomfortable without feeding suffering. And it's a pretty extraordinary thing to realize that we could do. And the more I learn I can do it for myself, I'm also realizing that I can do it for others too, because I'm not so afraid of discomfort. So for yourself, learn your own signs of when the kleshas are present, right? That's a really important thing. I know now what it feels like inside of my body, my heart, and my mind when I'm clinging. I know what it feels like when I'm resisting. I know what it feels like when I'm really identifying. I know what it feels like. I also can track behaviors that I do, certain thoughts that occur to me or that arise when that ego is really activated. When does it get activated? When it's afraid of perishing, when it's afraid of being hurt or damaged. When those stories get really loud. What is that like for you? So track that for yourself. We have to take responsibility for our suffering without blaming. Without blaming somebody else for it, we can see, oh yeah, my parents played a role in how I grew up. Oh yeah, this living in a, a consumerist patriarchy, that has a lot to do with with what I'm experiencing here. There's uh there's so there's so many factors. All factors really are involved with your experience that you're having right now. Um, Learn what it is that you can be responsible for. It's really helpful to name and label and maybe give some of that responsibility away. Great. But be careful of blame. Blame and shame, like I said before, will always be accompanying kleshas in some way or another. I get really stuck in blame and shame and guilt. And because of my hookup, it's usually turned on the self. I blame myself and I will get stuck in like a shame episode about things. Start to track that for yourself. How does it show up for you? And then, of course, sometimes I get very angry, and that means that now the blame, I'm projecting the blame outwards. I've got somebody else's to blame, and I'm so pissed off about it, right? Watch that for yourself. Judy mentioned, a tug and pull of emotions. Yeah, when the kleshas are present, we're going to notice a lot of emotional action. And if you can track it and start to learn how it relates to the kleshas, it's really helpful. And then we're untraining ourselves from binary thinking, good and evil, pleasant, painful, and starting to retrain in new vocabulary in a way. So again, good sign that you're in the kleshas, big binary thinking. Good way to train ourselves away. Pain is not bad, right? I am not bad. Evil doesn't exist, neither does purity, except as perhaps metaphors if they're useful for you. But the point is, how do you get back to vocabulary, kind of like I was saying before, of like aligned or misaligned? Creating more suffering or helping to ease the suffering? Working with, as an educator, you do this all the time where it's like, it's not helpful to, the kid who's running around with the scissors to go, oh, you're an awful child. I mean, take the scissors away from the running child first before you do anything else. Don't see that that's a situation that's going to probably create more suffering, and do what you can to take that away. Right? There's no moral overlay that we give because we give the kid the benefit of the doubt, at least hopefully at this point. that they're not bad or evil. And then we need to extend that same kind of thing to ourselves and to the world, and start to look at it again with, how do I just remove suffering? Noticing that as soon as I think part of the solution is blame, shame, and guilt, and realize that, oh no, I've definitely gotten back into the cliches. Okay, what do we get from our pain? This and a quote, and we're wrapping up. So Nisargadatta says, pleasure puts you to sleep and pain wakes you up. And think about that literally. Like, how do you go to sleep? You relax, you know? I've gotten up in the middle of the night due to some pain, whether it's just my bladder's full or whatever, many, many times. If things had just stayed kind of pleasant, sukha, easeful, no problem, I would have stayed asleep. We're not meant to sleep all the time. And of course, other things can wake us up besides pain. Doesn't always have to do that. But anyway, benefit of pain, it wakes us up. It's certainly done that for me in my life and in my consciousness. It teaches us what we are not. Nisargadatta says this, you can't see what you are until you recognize what you're not. And so in order to meet the true self, our true nature, pain is part of that journey for all of us. A great gift of my pain is humility, knocking me off a high horse where I was I had some really wrong worldviews, and also a kind of obnoxious smugness, as somebody who was privileged as a younger person to have a lot of health. And it enabled a moralistic avidya story that I was going around with. I was able to kind of look around and go, those people are suffering. They probably did something wrong. They probably ate the wrong foods, or they're not doing their yoga, or do you see what I'm saying? And that has been busted in me. Both, of course, from having close people in my lives who have had suffering and great calamities, and studying with wise teachers who say that it's just bullshit. But more than anything, from my own ego and sense of self getting pretty torn apart. This isn't true anymore. My body has some major issues now. And I am learning how to love myself, even though that ego is not intact. That ego story is not intact. That's a good thing. Pain gives us opportunities to kind of rewire, to meet new aspects of ourselves, right? To shake loose old aspects of ourselves. It's an opportunity to ask for, to learn how to ask for, and to learn how to receive help and support. It increases our sense of reciprocity and belonging. One of my happiest times, in a way, or purest times, were when I was a child. I was totally dependent, and things were not perfect, but I didn't have as much anxiety and depression, and anyway. But I was in a position in my life where I received lots of support all the time from adults and from teachers. Things got really hard for me when I got released out into the world, and I had to be my own support, and I hadn't really learned how to ask for help. Anyway, pain is responsible for so much of our growth and learning, and in our most important times. And so as you go through the rest of this month and beyond, I would love for you to be able to see for yourself how experiences with pain and discomfort are these wonderful opportunities, actually, for us. It doesn't mean they're easy. Please ask for help if you're going through one, when you're going through one, but also realize that it is not something to just be totally thrown out. Our pain experiences are, or avoided, right? Our pain experiences are also like the test of what we do on our cushion and our mat. Everything that you're trying to cultivate in yourself, it's like that exam to say, okay, so that's all great when everything's going fine. When things get tough, where are those techniques? Where are your values? Where's all this that you've been really cultivating? Um, those are the times when we actually really need them. And so we might find that when it comes down to it, there are certain techniques that really we don't need as much. And then there's other ones that we cultivate. And of course, through that experience, if there's a technique or a value or a mantra, or, if there's something, awareness with breath, being the witness to the pain, encircling the pain with love, if those work for you in that circumstance, those are yours. Those are yours to keep. Those are gonna be with you when you need them. The kind of trust that you can build in those touchstones and techniques and in yourself for being able to access them at a time that hard, that trust is huge. And that trust leaves when the episode is over, when the pain ends, as it always does. Anything that has a beginning has an end. When it does, you walk out without the pain necessarily, but with the trust, with that deeper sense of self. Okay, and with a little quote here. I also just want to say, this is a big part of my technique. Realizing, and this is coming right back around to the definition of what we really are according to our teachers. I think about how much bigger I am than the pain. How much bigger awareness is, how much bigger love is. I recognize awareness and love are still present. Life is continuing. I am still included in life, even in this most painful moment. What really matters, what is really good and right, it's here. Bigger than my stories, my ego, my likes and dislikes. Okay. It's the one that, sorry guys. Here we go. Okay. There it is. All right. The essence of saintliness is total acceptance of the present moment, harmony with things as they happen. A saint does not want things to be different from what they are. He knows that considering all factors, they are unavoidable. He is friendly with the inevitable and therefore does not suffer. Pain, he may know, but it does not shatter him. If he can, he does what is needed to restore the lost balance, or he lets things take their course. And then this last bit here, keep in mind your goal of freedom until it dawns on you that you are already free. That freedom is not something in the distant future to be earned with painful efforts, but perennially one's own to be used. Thank you for being with me today. We will meet again next week and do some meditation and some chanting, and keep bringing your questions. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Keep bringing your questions, and we'll have time to answer those over the next couple of weeks as well.